Hi everyone, my name is Casey Piola and I'm doing my Instructional Strategies mini presentation about non-linguistic representations. So according to the Washoe County School District Instructional Strategies list, non-linguistic representations can include drawings, kinesthetic activities, physical modeling, or graphically organizing. So this instructional strategy helps students create their own mental image of content, and then when students are asked to explain their image, they are using metacognition and they deepen their understanding of the content. So there's really two parts to a non-linguistic representation instructional moment, and that is the actual drawing or creation of the non-linguistic representation, and then the student explaining what they have chosen to do and why. So let's look more at non-linguistic representations. So there are some characteristics of this type of instructional strategy. One is that it can come in many forms. So this isn't just a drawing. This can be a student-generated graphic organizer. This can be a brief sketch. This can be a pictograph, a content map, a storyboard. There's lots of different ways that you can actually do non-linguistic representations in your classroom, depending on how old your students are and what it is that you're trying to get them to do. So another characteristic is that it must identify crucial information. So you need to make sure that you're asking your students really clearly to identify certain information. If they don't highlight the content that's being studied in their drawing, then they've just sort of drawn something or just created something. The idea is really to pinpoint that really important content that needs to be highlighted. So students should explain their non-linguistic representation. They should clarify the symbols and images that they used. So this is a really important part of this process, because when students have to explain their thinking, that's when that metacognition comes in, and basically they go over it twice because they've thought through it once and then now they are explaining it. So it's just another repetition with that content. It's also a really good time for the teacher to see if there's any errors in understanding, and provides a good opportunity for reteaching if there are some errors in understanding. So non-linguistic representations can take a lot of time. You have to have the time to think about the content and actually create or construct the non-linguistic representation, and then the time to explain the content and defend it against questions if necessary. And so what that means for us in the everyday planning process is that non-linguistic representations should really just be used for crucial content. For example, I would use this with my 11th grade modern U.S. history class on something like the causes of World War I or the different goals of the progressive movement. I would not use this on the different contributions of the state of Alabama to World War I, because that's really just more details, more going in depth about sort of a fringes topic, and really would be devoting too much time to that topic for the amount of time that it would take for a non-linguistic representation. So this is really used to highlight and to go back over that key information for whatever the content is that you're teaching. Another point for this is that students should revise their representations when necessary. So non-linguistic representations are not static. They can change and they can be edited. They can grow as students' knowledge changes and grows. So non-linguistic representations are great for things like note-taking journals, or having different content put around the room physically. Students can go and change those representations as their knowledge changes and grows. So my interest in using non-linguistic representations comes mainly from the growing population of students at Homewood High School with limited English language proficiency. we have a really large number of students that are called newcomers. So they, for whatever reason, it is just now their first year in a U.S. school in high school. And that presents some really different challenges from students that have maybe been with us for 4 or 5 years but still aren't testing fluent. So we're talking about very, very limited knowledge of the English language. And so I was really looking into strategies that would help teach content to that particular population. I also teach a large number of students who read below grade level or who have special needs. Students with IEPs, 504s, or student support plans, or students that just struggle with reading. I teach a general course, so I'm teaching the students that have chosen not to take the AP course. So I'm often teaching students who are struggling readers and struggling writers, and I wanted to know how I could ask them to represent content that wasn't necessarily linguistic. So social studies sometimes is going to overlook the creative side of students, and I believe that creative intelligence is definitely a type of intelligence. So, you don't have to be a great reader or writer in order to be intelligent, that there's a value in being able to create something, being able to represent something, and it gives students who have that as a talent or a skill or an intelligence the opportunity to shine in a course that maybe they don't normally do really well. So the way that I decided to implement this course was with a class called with an activity called the Who-Claration of Into What. And my premise here was that the Declaration of Independence is one of our founding documents, but it is a very difficult to access document because of the way that it's written. This was not written for 10th graders in Birmingham, Alabama. This was written by and for lawyers in Northern Virginia in the late 1700s, Philadelphia in the late 1700s. So the language is really difficult for us to access. So what we did in this activity, each student was given a small portion of the Declaration of Independence, a little excerpt, and it was their job to translate it into language that they would be more familiar with, and then to represent it with some sort of picture or drawing or symbol. And so you can see here that you have the people who are wanting to do certain things according to the rights that they believe they have, and the king telling them no. Here you have the king eating a box of law O's, and the students explained this, that the king was eating his words, that England had these certain ideas in its laws, but that the king was breaking those laws. So they said that he was eating his own words and that the words were the law, so here he is physically eating the laws. So I thought that was a really good example. And then this is the people saying that they want certain things from their government and their government agreeing. So none of these, with the exception of that one, it's a pretty nice drawing of a king, none of these are just great drawings, and that's not the point. The point is that the student represented the abstract idea in a concrete way that they created. And you may wonder, well, why are there words in this non-linguistic representation? But the idea is that the main thing that students are doing is the non-linguistic part, and if words or text are included, they're kept short, they're to the point, and they just further help the student explain their ideas. So some conclusions and questions that I had. One thing that I learned is that for the strategy to be most effective, the way that students acquire the background knowledge for the activity also needs to be non-linguistic. So I think next year when I teach this, I will look for maybe a graphic novel format of the story of the Declaration of Independence, or a video where the writing of the Declaration is acted out, because I think to reach those populations that I referenced students with limited English language proficiency, students with special needs, students who read below grade level. I think that the traditional way of presenting the content through lecture or reading in the textbook is not cutting it for them, and just by doing this activity, they aren't necessarily getting it. So I think next time I'm going to try to pair this non-linguistic representations activity with a content delivery method that is non-linguistic as well. So a question that I had from this, is there a way to seamlessly integrate the acquisition of content knowledge with this activity? And I guess what I meant by that is there a way to have this happen during content acquisition and not necessarily after content acquisition? And I think that that would be looking into something like a journal style of note-taking, or something like a storyboard where students are acquiring the content as they are non-linguistically representing it. So not necessarily like a during lecture, after lecture, but integrated in those two steps. I think a strength of this activity or this instructional method is that it makes students think outside the box about the content. It really makes them wrap their head around some abstract concepts and represent it in a more concrete way. I think a weakness is that students get more concerned about their ability to draw than they do their learning. And I had to assure many students that stick figures were fine, that they weren't being graded on the quality of their artwork. I had to tell several students that they were going to run out of time, that the king didn't need individual feathers on his coat. Students were wanting to get really detailed with their drawings. So, having to assure them that stick figures are fine, it's more about your understanding than it is the actual way that you are representing it as far as quality goes. So these are my references. You can see that I pulled really heavily from Robert Marzano. So he is a leader in this field of non-linguistic representation. So I pulled extensively from his research. What really got me going on this whole topic, though, was a book from James Percoco that I read during my master's program at the University of Alabama, and it was called A Passion for the Past, Creative Teaching of U.S. History. And that's really where I was first introduced to the concept of non-linguistic representation. He had a chapter in that book about using bumper stickers to represent information. So that really got me thinking about this, and that's another reason that when I saw non-linguistic representations on the list of instructional strategies, I jumped on that one. Overall, I think it was a good experience for my students. I think it's something that I will do again, maybe with some tweaks. Also, today was our homecoming pep rally, and my classes were only about 30 minutes, so I'm looking forward to doing this activity when I have full classes and full attention from students not thinking about their pep rally that they were about to go to. So I think that it will be more successful in the future when the circumstances are a little better, but that's teaching. All right, thanks y'all.